بالعالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Mukhtasar al-Quduri, we reached Kitab al-Khuntha. Right? And this is someone who is born with both male and female sexual organs. Right? So this is someone who has both male and female sexual organs. So we'll see what's the fiqh of that. Right? There's someone who engages in takhannuth, who, for example, is a male who acts or dresses in an effeminate manner. They're only khuntha zahiran, but what, in terms of ahkam sharia, what counts is what their biological state is. Right? So let's see what is mentioned about this. قال رحمه الله تعالى: إذا كان للمولود فرج وذكر فهو خنثى. If a child is born with both female and male sexual organs, right? Or then they are considered khuntha, right? And the same thing, as the commentator mentions, if they have neither sexual organs, right? Or they just have a hole that resembles neither sexual organs. These are considered alike. Then the khuntha, the basis is that خلقناكم, that the ذكر ونثى, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Surah An-Nisa. Yeah. No, so multiple places in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He has created us as male and female, right? And that is our religious understanding of it. So someone is born with both sexual so if they're born with both sexual organs, then فإن كان يبول من الذكر فهو غلام. Then we consider which organ is predominant. Right? One indication of it being predominant is that this is what they use to relieve they urinate from, right? So they urinate from the male organ, فهو غلام. Then they're considered a male boy. وإن كان يبول من الفرج فهو أنثى. And if they urinate from the female organ, they're considered a female. Right? وإن كان يبول منهما, if they urinate from both. والبول يسبق من أحدهما نسب إلى الأسبق. If they urinate from both, but the urine comes out first from one, then they're ascribed to that. Right? Because that's the asl. وإن كانا في السبق سواء. But if they urinate equally, at the same time from both, فلا عبرة بالكثرة عند أبي حنيفة. Then how much they urinate is not the criteria according to Abu Hanifa. وقال أبو يوسف ومحمد ينسب إلى أكثرهما. But Abu Yusuf and Muhammad said one ascribes it to the one they urinate more from. Right? And most of the works gave precedence to the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa in this, as mentioned in the commentary with its references. And in terms of fatwa, this matter would return to also the judgment of to the legal judgment. So even if someone is born with both male and female organs, we make tarjih, preponderance through indicators, like which is the primary organ they use, so that then this is easier for them. Okay, this person is male, this person is female, and that's how they're, but then وَإِذَا بَلَغَ الْخُنْثَى, if the khuntha reaches adulthood, وَخَرَجَتْ لَهُ لِحْيَةٌ أَوْ وَصَلَ إِلَى النِّسَاءِ, right? فَهُوَ رَجُلٌ. But because this is just preponderation, right? They have both organs, so they're initially treated according to which is the primary organ, but when they hit puberty, and there are clear indications of being a man, such as a beard grows, or they are attracted to women, or they experience ejaculation as a man experiences ejaculation, then they are considered a man, because these are signs of a man. وَإِنْ ظَهَرَ لَهُ ثَدْيٌ كَثَدْيِ الْمَرْأَةِ, but if they grow a breast like the breasts of women, أَوْ نَزَلَ لَهُ اللَّبَنْ فِي ثَدْيِهِ, or their breast gives milk, أَوْ حَاضَ, or they experience menstruation, أَوْ حَبَلْ, or they become pregnant, أَوْ أَمْكَنَ الْوُصُولُ إِلَيْهِ مِنَ الْفَرْجِ, or it is possible, if this arises, this is not saying these are tests that are done, or it's possible to have intercourse with them from their female organ, then they're considered a woman, because these are signs of a woman. فَإِن لَمْ يَظْهَرْ إِحْدَى هَذِهِ الْعَلَامَاتِ فَهُوَ خُنْثَى مُشْكِلٌ. If no signs, so there's initially treated according to the apparent sign, the only apparent sign with a child would be where they urinate from. Once they hit puberty, according with these outward signs, they're treated either a man or woman. So this would be someone who could have been considered a hermaphrodite, but these are stronger indicators, right? If no signs become manifest even after puberty, then they're considered khuntha mushkil, a problematic khuntha, right? And the commentator explains that, and the khuntha al-mushkil that has rulings related to them, قال في الهداية, the commentator mentions that Imam al-Marghinani rahimahullah mentions in the Hidayah, وَالْأَصْلُ فِيهَا يُؤْخَذْ بِالْأَحْوَطِ, they're treated according to what's most cautious and safest in religious matters, right? And that's the summary principle. So based on that in all things we treat, okay, what's the more precautionary thing? Because they could be male, they could be female. So in each matter of religion, they're treated with what is caution. وإذا وقف خلف الإمام قام بين صف الرجال والنساء. So when they stand in prayer, they stand between the men and the women. وتباع له أمة تختنه, and they would be sold a female slave who would do their khitan, their circumcision, right? Because she can look at him. But if that's not feasible, then it'll be considered like medical treatment, right? To circumcise them. فإن كان له مال, إذا كان له مال, if the khuntha has money. فإن لم يكن له مال ابتاع له الإمام من بيت المال. They don't have the money to do that, then the imam would buy them, such an individual, from the treasury. فإذا ختنته باعها ورد ثمنها إلى بيت المال. And upon performing the circumcision, the imam would sell her off again and return the money to the بيت المال. وإذا مات أبوه وخلف ابنا وخنثى فالمال بينهما عند أبي حنيفة في 3 أسهم. Because could be male, could be female. If and we'll see the details in inheritance. If the father of the khuntha mushkil dies and leaves a boy and a khuntha, the wealth is apportioned according to Abu Hanifa in 3 portions. The son will have 2 portions and the khuntha 1 portion. وهو أنثى عنده في الميراث. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, the hermaphrodite would be treated as, the khuntha al-mushkil would be treated as a woman would be with respect to the inheritance. إلا أن يتبين غير ذلك, unless the opposite becomes clear, فيتبع, so it will be followed. وقال للخنثى نصف ميراث الذكر ونصف ميراث الأنثى. The Sahibain said the khuntha has half the inheritance of a male plus half the inheritance of a female. وهو قول الإمام الشعبي. This is also the opinion of Imam al-Sha'bi. That's an interesting thing to mention in a matan, right? واختلفا في قياس قوله قال أبو يوسف المال بينهما على 7 أسهم للابن 4 وللخنثى 3 وقال محمد المال بينهما على 12 سهما للابن 7 وللخنثى 5. Right? And they differed on the position of في قياس قوله, on the base, on how the qiyas is done on the Imam's position. Abu Yusuf explained it, that the wealth is considered in 7 portions. The son would get 4 and the khuntha would get 3. Imam Muhammad said the wealth is apportioned into 12 portions. The son would get 7, the khuntha would get 5. Right? But the position of Imam, and there's actually difference of opinion here as to what is the position of Muhammad al-Hasan himself on this, as mentioned in the commentary from Allama Qasim from the Tasheeh. And the more evident position is that he is actually with Abu Hanifa, and the position of Abu Hanifa is the relied upon. Then you have, so that's the khuntha. There's more details, and the issues of how the inheritance of the khuntha is treated come up in detail in inheritance. Then he has Kitabul Mafqud, the one who is missing. Now, someone who's missing, what do we assume about someone missing? Right?
That they're alive?
That they're alive. Right? But the problem is, they're alive. Now a person, we know, كل المسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله عرضه. Their life, their wealth, and their honor. Now, their life, that's their life, but their wealth has implications. Why? Because what about, so they have wealth, what about providing for their family? What about their non-material rights? They're married. They disappeared. What about their marriage? What about so the mafqud, right, is considered the commentator gives a good definition. يعني المفقود, the missing person, غائب انقطع خبره, is an absent person who we're cut off from any information about them. ولا يعلم حياته ولا موته, we have no knowledge whether they're alive or dead. Right? Now, in the tanweer, he adds an important proviso here. He says, هو في حق نفسه حي. With respect to themselves, we assume they're alive. And the Durr explains this is built upon باستصحاب الحال. Right? And استصحاب الحال, right? This is a principle of continuity. Right? Or it's also sometimes called قاعدة استصحاب الحال or قاعدة البقاء. Right? And it's one of the qawaid, one of the earliest qawaid, which is الأصل بقاء ما كان على ما عليه كان. The basis is that things remain as they are. Right? And this is a very powerful principle in the Sharia. Right? So the default is we assume the person's alive. And you don't deem someone dead unless you're sure that they're dead. But this now has implications. Allah. So he says, either, right? So what the ruling of the mafqud revolves around, Ibn Adi says, فَالْمَدَارُ إِنَّمَا هُوَ عَلَى الْجَهْلِ بِحَيَاتِهِ وَمَوْتِهِ. The ruling of the mafqud revolves around us not knowing, and i.e. not being able to know whether the person is alive or not. Right? So قال الإمام القدوري رحمه الله تعالى إذا غاب الرجل ولم يعرف له موضع ولم يعلم حي هو أم ميت نصب القاضي من يحفظ ماله ويقوم عليه, أي على ماله, وينفق على زوجته وأولاده من ماله. So if a person disappears and it's not known where they've disappeared to, and of course this would require investigation and verification, and there'd be processes that related to that depending on societal circumstance and context, and it's not known whether they're alive or dead. The qadi would appoint someone to protect their wealth, because it's the qadi's responsibility, or it's a ruler's responsibility delegated in matters to the legal system to protect the public interest in general and to protect the interests of those unable to protect their own interest, right? To guard their wealth, right? Because the person disappeared, so they have property, the basis is people, would transgress onto their, transgress their property. To guard their wealth and to take care of it. يقوم عليه, to protect it, بحفظه. Right? So if they have agricultural land, that it be cultivated, etc., etc. So that you have to safeguard their interest. ويستوفي حقوقه, to fulfill their rights, because they have debts to pay, bills, etc. Because if those aren't paid, those debtors would take over, right? And there's a nice principle laid out from the Hidayah, you can see. From there, وَيُنْفِقْ عَلَى زَوْجَتِهِ وَأُولَادِهِ, and this person appointed would spend on their spouse and their children, right, that they're dependent upon. مِنْ مَالِهِ, from their wealth, because the assumption is that they're alive. And these people have rights over them, right? So, so their rights are taken care of, but the rights of those who are dependent upon them are taken care of, right? And this is sort of beautifully encapsulated by the hadith of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أعطي, it's part of a longer hadith, كل ذي حق حقه. Right? Although the context is different, but that's the general principle, right? So their spouse and their children are supported from that person's wealth. But then what about the marriage? 10 years pass. Right? 10 years pass. She's still married to him. 20 years pass. How long do we assume that he's still alive? But this has real implications, because a person, and some people get confused about this, because is there a third possibility beyond being alive or dead? No, you're either alive or dead. There's no intermediate state. Now, if you are dead, what happens? Does a dead person still own stuff? So if we say you're dead, then when did we deem them dead? And then that has implications. What happens to their wealth? What if someone went into the jungle and got lost, came back 11 years later? So we deem them dead. What happens to their property? What happens to their marriage? All kinds of things. Right? So it's important to understand, the assumption is the person's alive until it's established that they're dead. Right? وَالْيَقِينُ, and this goes back to the principles of certainty and doubt. So there's istishab al-hal, there's also the principle of certainty and doubt. Al-aslu fi shay' bi manzilati al-yaqeen. Right? The basis of something is like our operational certainty. Our operational certainty, or our operational assumption is the person's alive. Right? Do we deem them dead just on possibility? Maybe they died. No. وَالْيَقِينُ الْأَصْلِ لَا يَزُولُ بِالشَّكِّ الطَّارِئ. The original certainty is not lifted by doubts that come over. Right? Umar, you went home and came back? You went home and came back? Okay, so then when do we deem the person dead? Right? So in the absence of evidence to the contrary, the Hanafis and some other madhabs, right, and the Shafi'is as well, took the position that we stick with the assumption of continuity. وَلَا يُفَرَّقُ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ امْرَأَتِهِ. And one does not, the qadi, the لَا يُفَرَّقُ أي لَا يُفَرِّقُ الْقَاضِي. The judge does not, just on the person's disappearance, terminate the marriage. Right? Because this absence does not mean termination of the marriage. فإذا تم له 120 سنة من يوم ولد حكمنا بموته. And so then if 120 years pass from when he was born, we deem the person dead. I mean, the qadi would deem the person dead. Because the zahir is that no one would live beyond 120. Right? So it'd be like operationally certain. Right? Right? And this is the narration of Al-Hasan ibn Ziyad from Abu Hanifa. Imam Muhammad mentioned that the basis of the madhab is that it would be when all the person's peers have died, right? And this is ikhtilaf in taqdeer, right? When all their peers have died. And some said it's 90 years, right? Right? And many took that. The zahir of the madhab, Abu Hanifa, la yuqaddir, right? Would be when all their peers died, then they estimated. So one narration from Imam Abu Hanifa is that it's 120 years. That's what Quduri mentions. That's the narration of Al-Hasan from Abu Hanifa. Muhammad's narration is that when the peers die, and some said that would typically be 90 years, right? Etc. So you can see the discussion. So then, وَإِذَا وَاعْتَدَّتْ امْرَأَتُهُ. So once the Qadi judges that now the person for sure is disappeared, right? All their peers, last peer, keeled over, then we say, okay, now we are reasonably sure, we're effectively certain your husband's dead. So then the woman would make iddah, because now he's been legally deemed dead. وَقُسِّمَ مَالُهُ. And the person's wealth would be distributed. بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ وَرَثَتِهِ الْمَوْجُودِينَ. And between their remaining inheritors. Right? فِي ذَلِكَ الْوَقْتِ. At that time. وَمَنْ مَاتَ مِنْهُمْ قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ لَمْ يَرِثْ مِنْهُ. And any of the inheritors who had died before that would not inherit. Right? In the sense that we would not deem them to inherit and their children, etc. Because in this, the mafqood, the tafriq happens once the hukum is made of death, not from the time of disappearance. And this used to be rare, right? This used to be rare, that people just disappear like this, etc., etc. But that's where, this is the fiqh of it. In terms of fatwa, even early or historically in the Hanafi madhab, the opinion was taken from the Malikis, right? That if she goes to the Qadi tells her to wait 4 years from his disappearance. 4 years from the person's disappearance, because they could have just gone on a long journey, left a message, never got home, whatever. After that, she would perform the iddah of death, iddat al-wafat, after the 4 years. And then he would terminate the marriage. But people would not inherit from the person, right? So there's a tafriqa between the disappeared person, they're terminating the marriage, and on the other side, distributing their wealth. Right? So, and many of the Hanafis took this opinion. This became a huge issue in the Indian subcontinent in the beginning of the 20th century, particularly when so many of the people of the Indian subcontinent participated in the Great European War, sometimes called the First World War, right? Right? But the world is not just Europe, right? So a lot of people disappeared. So many of the ulama looked into this, and the opinion was there before. It was extensively used in the Ottoman times, etc., but it hadn't been widespread in and Maulana Ashraf Ali Tanvi and others as well looked at the issue, and after correspondence with the Maliki ulama to get the Maliki position down, because there's not Malikis just hanging around in India, they gave fatwa on this position, right? of the Malikis, right? And it's become sort of the practice upon position within our madhab. It's also, there, in the absence of an Islamic legal system, it's important for people to have a specified right of divorce. So they, in the event of, and one of the things, the event of disappearance, etc., that they have the right of divorcing themselves. Right? Kitab al-Ibaq, the runaway slave. Right? Right? إذا أبق مملوك فرده رجل على مولاه من مسيرة 3 أيام فصاعدا فله عليه الجعل 40 درهما وإن رده لأقل من ذلك فبحسابه. Right? So if someone catches a runaway slave and return them to their owner, if it's more than the traveling distance, then they deserve the ju'l, right? Which is a designated payment. And if it's less, which is 40 dirhams, and if they return them for a lesser distance than that, then according to how far they caught them from. وإن كانت قيمته أقل من 40 درهما قضي له بقيمته. But if the worth of the runaway was less than that, then the one who found and returned them, then accordingly, then they would have to pay for their qima, the market value of of the runaway, illa dirham, except for 1 dirham, right? Otherwise there would be no interest in returning them. وَإِنْ أَبَقَ مِنَ الَّذِي رَدَّهُ فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ. But if the runaway runs away from the one who found them, then the one who found them they don't have any compensation due on them, right? Because it's an amana in their hands. وَيَنْبَغِي أَنْ يُشْهِدَ إِذَا أَخَذَهُ أَنَّهُ يَأْخُذُهُ لِيَرُدَّهُ. And it's proper, and ينبغي indicates recommendation, but the Hidayah says this is wajib or hatm, yeah, right? Yani wajib, according to Abu Hanifa, that one bears witness that one is taking the runaway in order to return them, lest it be ghasb, lest it be misappropriation. فإن كان العبد الآبق رهنا فالجعل على المرتهن. If the runaway was a rahan, was collateral, then the payment for it is upon the one who took the collateral, because they have the duty of guarding the collateral. Okay, so that's Kitab al-Ibaq. These are small chapters. We don't need to go into extensive details. I feel embarrassed about the chapter on the runaway slave, because once I hadn't been in touch with Shaykh Hassan for a long time, so I called him and it was his answering machine, so I started leaving a message to say that I'm your runaway slave. The runaway slave, their prayer and their fast is not I went in this whole flowery thing, and the phone message, the phone hung up because the message was filled. And then I didn't call him for 2 weeks. He said, you're worse than the runaway slave. At least the runaway slave is running. You disappeared. I said, Sayyidi, please forgive me. He said, you disappeared so long, we forgot. There's nothing to forgive. But he was very nice about it. Anyways, Kitabu Ihya al-Mawat. This is reviving abandoned lands, right? there are conditions for this. And part of the wisdom in this is that remote areas, for them to be brought under beneficial usage. Right? But these are remote areas that are not owned by any person and are not under the ownership of the ruler. Right? Ihya is to bring something to life. Right? So some abandoned, so there's a Shari'i definition of it, which is إصلاح الأرض الموات بالبناء أو الغرس أو الكراب. Right? It's to rectify abandoned land, either by building upon it, or by cultivating it, or by irrigating it, or other than that, to bring it into some form of usage. So he says, وَالْمَوَاتِ مَا لَا يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. The mawat, abandoned land, is land that is not being benefited from الانقطاع الماء عنه, because there's no water there, right? أو لغلبة الماء عليه, or because it's flooded. أو ما أشبه ذلك, or the like of this. مما يمنع الزراعة, of the things that would prevent for it to be cultivated. فما كان منها عاديا لا مالك له أو كان مملوكا في الإسلام لا يعرف له مالك بعينه وهو بعيد من القرية بحيث إذا وقف إنسان في أقصى العامر فصاح لم يسمع الصوت فهو موات. Right? So it's abandoned land, right? That it's not possible to benefit from. Then that of, so abandoned land that is adiyan, that regular abandoned land, meaning that has been abandoned for a long time, such that no one lam yumlak fil Islam, right? That no one has owned it in Islam, because Islam has come with emphasis on the rights of Allah, but also emphasis on the rights of people. So ownership is an important right. To be clear, who owns what? Right? So this is land that we have no record of anybody owning it in Islam. Right? So لا مالك له أي في الإسلام. From the time that this land in Muslim territory, nobody has owned it. Right? So it's abandoned land, nobody has owned it. أو كان مملوكا في الإسلام, or it has been owned in Islam, meaning in Muslim lands, while because before Islam, the assumption is there are no records, etc. Because if an owner is known, it's not an abandoned land. It belongs to the owner, right? Or if it was owned within Islam, but no owner is known specifically. Right? There's no one is claiming it. Right? And the basis is that from the contingent duties of the ruler is to have a register of who owns what. Now, وَهُوَ بَعِيدٌ مِنَ الْقَرْيَةِ, if this abandoned land is away from human dwellings, such that if someone stood in the furthest dwellings and shouted, their voice would not be heard, then it's considered abandoned land. Because the land that is near human dwellings, the assumption would be it belongs to somebody. Right? How far? There's some discussion on that. Right? Right? من أحياه بإذن الإمام ملكه. Whoever revives this land with the permission of the authorities owns it. And they would have to verify first that nobody does own it. وَأَنْ أَحْيَاهُ بِغَيْرِ إِذْنِهِ لَمْ يَمْلِكْهُ عِنْدَ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ. But if one revives the land without the permission of the rulers, they don't own it. وَقَالَا يَمْلِكُهُ. But the Sahibain said the person would own it. Right? Right? And the position of Imam Abu Hanifa is given. But it's, is the Sahih in Jawhar al-Nayra, it quotes that he doesn't automatically own it, but the Qadi would look into it, and if the interest is in giving them ownership of it, they can give a retroactive permission. And they say al-idhn al-lahiq bimanzilat يعني الإجازة اللاحقة بمنزلة الوكالة السابقة. Right? The permission given after is like they acted with authority from before. But it's not allowed to do normally. Like you ask permission first before reviving it. ويملك الذمي بالإحياء كما يملك المسلم. A non-Muslim in Muslim lands, right? Someone we have a dhimma with them, so a Muslim living in a non-Muslim living in Muslim lands would also own by reviving abandoned lands as a Muslim would, right? Because it is the reviving that is the sabab of milk, and they revived it. And the ahkam, a-dhimma, that lahum ma lana wa alayhim ma alayna. The basis is that they have the same rights and responsibilities as we do, except in the ones that are exclusively religious. وَمَنْ حَجَّرَ أَرْضًا وَلَمْ يُعَمِّرْهَا 3 سنين أخذها الإمام ودفعها إلى غيره. Right? This is connected to revived land, not their own property. It's your property, you keep it. Right? من حجر أرضا, someone who found abandoned land and they just delineated it. Right? They put, they demarcated it. By hajjara, they put stones or they put a fence or whatever, but they did not develop it in any of the ways of developing it for 3 years. The Imam would have initially given them the right to it, but until you have revived, you sort of claimed it, but then actually revived it, you haven't really revived it. So the Imam can then give it to somebody else. And it's a public interest, right? Because by cultivating that land, etc., you're bringing collective benefit. وَلَا يَجُوزُ إِحْيَاءُ مَا قَرُبَ مِنَ الْعَامِرِ. It's not permitted to revive land that is close to inhabitant lands, because the assumption is that it belongs to somebody. وَيُتْرَكْ مَرْعًا لِأَهْلِ الْقَرْيَةِ. If an owner is not known for it, and the ruler doesn't say this is their land, it's left as grazing ground for the people of the town or the village. وَمَطْرَحًا لِحَصَائِدِهِمْ. And as a place for casting their things. Right? It's like considered public land. وَمَنْ حَفَرَ بِئْرًا فِي بَرِّيَّةٍ فَلَهُ حَرِيمُهَا. If someone digs a well in the countryside, again, according to, with the permission of the ruler, right? Yeah, with the same tafsil between the Imam and the Sahibain, right? Because digging a well is a type of ihya, a type of reviving of land. So in unowned land, this is not like I go build a well on Hamza's land. Hamza's like, it's my land, right? This is in abandoned land. فَلَهُ حَرِيمُهَا. By digging a well, you have the right to the harim, which is the land around it, in all 4 directions. فَإِنْ كَانَتِ الْبِئْرُ لِلْعَطَنِ فَحَرِيمُهَا 40 ذِرَاعًا. If the well is for the drinking of camels, then it's harim, that it's the land around it that you have right to is 40 dhira, about 20 meters in each direction. Right? وإن كانت للناضح, right? And if it's water that's for its extraction, right? So the للعطن is that which the camels drink from themselves. But if the water is extracted, for example, by camels or other animals, فستون ذراعا, then 60 ذراع. And this is, and here there's a correction made to Quduri. This is actually it being 60 ذراع if for the water is taken out from the well. This is actually the narration of the Sahibain, and the position of Abu Hanifa in both types of wells is 40 ذراع. And this was what was chosen in most of the other mutun. وإن كانت عينا فحريمها 300 ذراع. But if the well that was dug was a spring, right? Ain, right? So it gushes forth, right, and flows, then the harim around it is 300 ذراع, 150 meters in each direction. And this taqdeer is not lazim, but rather it returns to the judgment of people. How much do you need around it for it to be possible to benefit from? Right? Right? And there's other fiqh related to water and wells of that comes in its place, that it's obligatory to protect water. So one protects water, one by not throwing filth or polluting the water in other ways, throwing garbage in it, etc. But also the area around the well needs to be protected so that so you're not allowed to urinate close to wells, etc., lest the wells or close to water that people drink from, etc., lest it be polluted, right? And there's fiqh related to that based on hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَمَنْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يَحْفِرَ فِي حَرِيمِهَا مُنِعَ مِنْهُ. So once, so the area around the well, right, with a basic well, 20 meters, 40 dhira from each side, or a spring well that gushes forth. So if it gushes forth, the water around it would be much wider. It become like there's a spring, and it's going to have a pool. So a wider range of people would come to benefit from it, right? Or they would need wider benefit. So the person has a right to, this 300 dhira or 500 dhira, depending on the size of the well. Right? So they said depend on taqdeer al-nas. How much does a person reasonably need to be able to benefit from that kind of well? And then if others want to dig a well in that area, because if there's water there, then someone else would want to build a well too. Then they will be prevented from digging it within that harim area. وَمَا تَرَكَ الْفُرَاتُ أَوْ الدِّجْلَ وَعَدَلَ عَنْهُ وَيَجُوزُ عَوْدُهُ إِلَيْهِ لَمْ يَجُوزْ إِحْيَاؤُهُ. What is left by the Furat or the Dijla or other rivers, right? And it moves away from, but it's possible, according to the judgment of experts, that the river could return to it, then it is not permitted to consider that reclaimed land, like reclaimed water, right? Because what happens, this is especially before rivers would be dammed, right? In floods, that sometimes the courses of rivers would shift. So you'd be left with a pool of water in the middle of nowhere, right? But if it's within what would be from the shifting of a river, right? Because with different floods, they would potentially take multiple courses, then that, you couldn't say that's my land, because in general, the water is haqqul amma. It's everybody's right. الناس شركاء في ثلاث. People are partners in three. Which is, which is fodder and fire and water. Right? So the water river, the assumption is public water. Everybody has a right to it. وإن كان لا يجوز أن يعود إليه فهو كالموات. But if the river changed its course such that it would not return to that sort of that water, then it could be treated like abandoned, like mawat. إذا لم يكن حريما لعامر. If it's not from the harim, from the lands ascribed to something that has been recovered or owned. يملكه من أحياه. It will be owned by someone who revives that, according to Imam Abu Hanifa. ومن كان له نهر في أرض غيره فليس له حريمه. If someone owns a river in someone else's land, they don't have a harim, they don't have land around it that is theirs. Right? Someone owns the river, someone else owns the land. You own the river, so I have to let you traverse the river, but I don't have to give you any of my land. Right? This is عند أبي حنيفة. إلا أن يقيم البينة على ذلك, unless one can prove that you own not only the river, but you own the banks. وقالا له مسنات يمشي عليها. But the Sahibain said they have they have the banks such that they will be able to walk on them. ويلقي عليها طينه. They have the banks so that they can walk on the riverside, and they can throw the excess mud from the river, so they can reinforce the river. Because so let's say you own two properties, and in the middle someone else owns a property. You own a river that runs like a stream that runs across, but you need to reinforce the banks of the stream. Otherwise, what will happen? The stream will dissipate onto someone else's land. You want to preserve the water from your property to your property. It goes through someone else's property, right? Right? And the basis is the opinion of the Imam, but there's a lot of detail about this. And then you have Kitabul Ma'zun, right? So we'll stop there today. Next class, we will finish what we wanted to finish, because from the Mu'amalat, because we have the Ma'zun, and Muzara'a, and Musaqa. So we'll finish that, and then we'll have finished Quduri. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Then we have the rest of the book left, which is post nikah, which is on public law. Right. Any questions, folks?